All right, a power two instant reaction with just me and Tom Hannafin here today, here on College Football Addiction. Tom, some breaking news. James Franklin heading to Virginia Tech. We actually just talked about this on today's Power Two, so if anybody wants to go back and listen, I will link it at the end. But we didn't get that clip out because this happened faster than my little interns could type their fingers on getting another video out. This is a massive hire for Virginia Tech. Like, all kudos to them, right?
This is tremendous for Virginia Tech. We were saying earlier on today on the Power 2 that, it kind of felt like James Franklin was holding out for Florida State or Florida or LSU. And this whole time, this just didn't feel like the right fit. And fit is very important as a coach. This makes perfect sense for Virginia Tech and for James Franklin, as opposed to hoping that Florida State would move on from Mike Norvell, as opposed to trying to get in on the LSU Florida sweepstakes where Lane Kiffin is clearly the darling of that ball. He looked for an opportunity that was going to make sense. And he is long known as a DMV guy. And this is where he is at his best in terms of recruiting, where his connections are the best they can possibly be. So the location makes a ton of sense. I think another thing that's curious is that Virginia Tech just got done with Brent Pry, who was the longtime disciple of James Franklin, longtime defensive coordinator for him at Penn State and beyond. And you would think maybe there'd be some hesitation there. So it tells you he probably did a great job in the entire interview process. I'm not shocked to hear that. What I was surprised by was I thought he would hold out for a higher profile brand, but I love everything about this hire for Virginia Tech. And it gives them the ability to compete almost immediately. Penn State has lost a serious amount of their recruits, and there's a feeling like there's a decent amount that will want to follow James Franklin regardless of where he goes. Blacksburg has been dying for a winner in a long time. Whether or not they ascend to the point where they're competing for the national championship, who knows? But just getting back to those days where it's respectable, winning, competitive football like Frank Beamer put on the field for so many years, that's the expectation. And I think James Franklin can meet that and exceed that.
In an ACC that is almost every year topsy-turvy and its biggest brands flounder a lot over these last few years, when you look at Florida State and Clemson and even Miami to some degree, I won't put them on the same level as Florida State and Clemson, but even Miami, who was so talented and you thought a month into this year was going to go out and just run roughshod over the ACC. It does feel like it's wide open for the taking. And I think the ACC has a lot of good coaches. I really like Brent Key and I like Jeff Brom. Mario does a great job recruiting. I like Manny and Fran Brown for the levels that they're at. I think there are Rhett Lashley. I don't mean to leave anybody out. There are a lot of really good coaches in this conference. It feels like Franklin immediately raises their floor to, man, less than 8 wins would be pretty disappointing in Blacksburg now. And I know that every fan of every team wants to go out and win national championships and compete for it all. But man, in the ACC, if you get to that 9-10 win mark, just barely above that floor, you are in the conversation for Charlotte. And then thus you're in the conversation for a college football playoff berth. And so I don't want to put crazy expectations like it's CFP or bust or anything on Virginia Tech in year one. But like by year 2 or 3, like that should be enough time to say, okay, man, we should be competing for Charlotte. And then if you compete for Charlotte, you compete for the CFP. It immediately raises their floor. And at the same time, it raises their ceiling a whole heck of a lot. Because for all the knocks that people may have on Franklin or all the negative thoughts they may have about can't win the big game or just anything else, as a Penn State guy, like, he's coached serious big time football. And it's not man, we went to the group of 5 and we grabbed this guy because we think he might be the next emerging star. It's like, no. He's one of the more respected coaches in college football from an X's and O's, from a wins and losses perspective. And he immediately brings that to Virginia Tech.
I completely agree. He's shown the ability to reload year after year, whether that is with talent or with his coaching staffs. That's one thing he's very, very good about consistently at Penn State, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Ironically, having been a quarterback at East Stroudsburg in Pennsylvania once upon a time and predominantly an offensive guy by trade, his teams have always had a defensive approach. And whether that's the Penn State effect or not, it works for Virginia Tech because that was always a program that, regardless of what was going on offense, you knew that the defense was going to make plays. We mentioned Beamer ball. The special teams is always going to be strong. That's something James Franklin has excelled at, having outstanding defenses and having outstanding staffs. So I think he's going to be able to provide that. And then, yes, like the profile of the ACC is hurting right now. And this is a much welcome shot in the arm. Now, you're in a situation where going into 2026, it's like, all right, who are the faces of this conference? You have James Franklin, Bill Belichick, Mario Cristobal, all within the same conference. So these coaches that are high profile, but it is kind of anybody's game, which is fascinating. And I know you mentioned Jeff Brom, who I think the world of, and now you have the likes of Virginia bowing up, and Pat Narduzzi, what's he's going to do at Pitt, and Georgia Tech and Brent Key seem to be committed for a long time. The ACC is going to be competitive within itself. And oh, by the way, Dabo Sweeney, we expect to be with Clemson for a while. So again, I don't see a reason why Virginia Tech wouldn't be in the conversation to be winning ACC championships soon. In 2026, I don't know about that. That might be too quick of a turnaround. But to see them competitive next year, yeah, that's definitely a high expectation.
What about from a recruiting perspective? You mentioned the DMV connections. I mean, Virginia Tech, yes, it's not South Georgia talent. It's not South Florida talent. It's not Texas. I get it. But historically has put out a pretty good level of athlete. You're kind of in the middle of a lot of great places. Like you're not that far from the tri-state areas of North Carolina. You're not that far from the South. I mean, it is kind of a Southern school. Geographically, no, but we consider Virginia the South. And you're not too far from the Midwest, and he's certainly got the connections there from his time. He recruited in the SEC. Like, from a recruiting standpoint, I don't want to. There's a different caliber of athlete a lot of times that'll go to the Big Ten versus the ACC. So I get that. Is it crazy to think that he could have similar to Penn State type levels of success recruiting, or maybe just below that? Like, what are your thoughts there?
It depends on what this financial commitment we heard about from Virginia Tech, what that's going to be. I think whatever that number is, it has to meet whatever his expectations are. So obviously, if he's signing up, then he likes what he heard.
No.
James Franklin has had outstanding ties in the Northeast for a very long time. He consistently has gotten talent, obviously, out of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Ohio, Maryland. He has continued to just crush in recruiting, Virginia especially. So you have the element of James Franklin now holding a grudge. And I've said this before, he has an ego, just like we all do, but he has an ego. He holds grudges. For a long time, Penn State was destroying the DMV in terms of recruiting and poaching talent. I wouldn't be shocked if James Franklin was marching into Pennsylvania more often than not. Now, at the same time, James Franklin has a reputation that you can't question at all. For all the people that will say, oh, okay, well, he doesn't win the big game. What he absolutely does is put stars into the National Football League.
Yeah.
Year after year after year, multiple rounds, every single year. You have a multitude of face of the franchise type players throughout the NFL who are all over social media right now, happy for James Franklin. Tyler Warren was in Penn State this past week with the team leading up to their victory at Michigan State, and he might win Rookie of the Year. There's all these examples of, hey, James Franklin knows how to develop talent and put them in the National Football League. Come to Blacksburg and we'll get you where you want to go. He's also, over the last, I'd say, 5 years, now that Penn State is in the NIL era and is starting to use its war chest, he was able to get into Georgia. He was able to get into Florida, parts of Texas at times, California at times. That it didn't make up the bulk of the team, but select players he was able to grab from those high-profile high schools in those high-profile states. So I think that this renewed vigor, I think he has something to prove. He said it on ESPN College Game Day weeks ago that he wants to win a national championship somewhere else. So having been fired by Penn State, and Penn State's allegedly getting a deal on his buyout from $49 million to $9 million. So it's kind of a good for both sides sort of situation. Penn State keeps their budget down. Virginia Tech gets their guy and they get to spend with him. I think the ultimate question is going to be, how much does Virginia Tech have to spend? That'll answer a lot of those questions.
We go live on the Power 2 every Monday and Wednesday. Tom, part of that show, along with our co-host Cole Thompson. So make sure that you are subscribed. You mentioned this, and I do want to ask you just quickly, putting stars in the NFL, does he have a better eye for talent than people understand? And is he able to kind of find those maybe, diamonds in the rough type things? Or is it development? Is it both? Like what? Because he hasn't like stacked top 5 after top 5 after top 5 recruiting class by any means. But is one of those sides heavier, or is it truly just like the perfect mix? Like thoughts there?
I'm curious to see if his analytics guy, Andy Frank, comes with him, has been with him for a long time. And I say that because there is a very analytical, by the numbers approach to the way that James Franklin recruits. And we've seen how at Penn State, wide receiver has been an issue. Okay. They don't necessarily go and get the A plus wide receiver on a regular basis. But what he does really well is he develops relationships and then he develops players. I mentioned Tyler Warren. He's a perfect example. He was a high school quarterback at one point and then converted to tight end, comes to Penn State. He's in a deep tight end room, and slowly over time, he turns into a unicorn that now people are saying could be the next Rob Gronkowski. Micah Parsons was somebody who really didn't even learn the linebacker position at Penn State because he just didn't have enough time in the system before COVID, and then he went pro, and we all know what he is. Abdul Carter switched from linebacker he was a defensive end in high school. He switched to linebacker at Penn State, and then he switched to defensive end back again last year, his first full season as a defensive end at the college level, and it worked. We all know how much it worked. So I think his gift is being able to develop talent, maintain outstanding relationships with the players and their families, and I think that's really important in Virginia Tech. I think that's the culture with Virginia Tech is very, very similar to Penn State. So I think it's going to fit really, really well in terms of the way that he builds that program, that community, that family, so to speak. But at the same time, like he does do things with an analytical approach. And for many years, this was really kind of before NIL at Penn State. Every 3 years, he'd have a top 5, top 10 class. But for the most part, those classes lived in the middle teens, right? He really didn't get the full breadth of Penn State's assets in the back end of his time there. He was starting to get it, and the frustrations obviously ran out in State College. Again, depending on how much money Virginia Tech is willing to pump into the football program, if he's able to get their recruiting classes into the teens in the next 3 years and then maybe into the top 10s after that, yeah, Virginia Tech's going to be able to make some noise in the ACC and beyond.
Yeah, there just aren't that many ACC teams that recruit at that level. Florida State in the teens, Miami in the top 10, Clemson teeters between that top 7 to 12 range. So it's wide open, when you look at comparatively to the Big Ten or the SEC. So, Tom, thank you for hanging out. We'll be live on Wednesday at noon. Again, make sure that you are locked in with College Football Addiction so you catch the Power 2 there. Appreciate your time, bud.
Thanks, man.
Make sure that you are into the Sleeper app as well. Use our code CFA to get a 100% match up to $100. We appreciate Sleeper for their support. All of our content is brought to you by them. We will talk to you guys soon here on College Football Addiction and the Power 2.